This is Chapter 8, Part 3, Resisting Persuasion. How do we strengthen views and get strong in resisting people's efforts to change us? How can we hold a wise, informed position amidst all the noise, all the bellowing influences coming at us? And how can we get someone else to change an attitude that isn't benefiting them? So we'll go over a few hypotheses that may be applicable to you as you think about them. So first off, the self-validation hypothesis, we will rely on any thought more, first when we believe it's true, so that's validating our thought, and second, when we feel good about the thought, affective validation or validation for our emotions. And so validation gives us confidence in our thoughts, causing them to be resistant to change. And the why movement is part of a bigger word that comes on the next slide. So we're talking about embodiment. Can confidence be embodied? And so that means that we're experiencing it through our body instead of through like an abstract phenomenon or a psychological state. There are some suggestions through the studies I'm showing that indeed experiencing something with our bodies can impact how we feel. So example one, people who nodded during a speech were not necessarily indicating agreement with the speaker, but were boosting their confidence in what the speaker said. So if we observe people who are nodding or shaking their head during a speech and ask them why, this is what they report. If we set up an experimental paradigm and ask people to either nod, which means yes, or shake their heads, which means no. So we ask them to nod while listening to positive and negative words, and then we see how many words they recall later. They tend to recall more of the positive words, the words that are consistent with what they were doing with their head. People who shook their heads in the same condition, listening to both positive and negative words, tended later to recall more negative words. So, is there any way that this might influence us, or is there any way that we might use this to help others change an attitude that is not beneficial, like smoking or something like that? The hostile media phenomenon we already talked about, but we do have a short little video I've presented, and it is for you, and so have a few other ideas. So resistance to persuasion, attentional biases. So what's an attentional bias? It just means it's the attitude that we already hold, and that attitude is going to guide what we attend to, how we interpret it, and how we remember it. And so how does it do that? Well, selective attention, for one thing. The attitude we already hold will lead us to prefer arguments supporting our position, or to prefer weak, silly arguments against our position. Things we think, oh yeah, oh, that's ridiculous. And just a quick example, students who were in favor of legalizing marijuana preferred to listen to strong arguments in favor of their position and arguments against their position that were easy to refute. And if this reminds you of confirmation bias from our earlier chapter, I think you're right on target. And then selective evaluation means that we're going to be a lot more critical of arguments against our position than for our position. So let's say you support one of the candidates in the upcoming election, and you hear arguments for that candidate and against the candidate. Well, when you hear the argument for the candidate, you're likely to just say, and accept it. But when you hear arguments against your candidate, now you're like to say, well, look, did they even think about this? And challenge it with more of our critical thinking. It's wise to apply critical thinking to both arguments. And then there's a couple more short videos, just a couple minute things to clarify these ideas. So again, clarifying these ideas with short videos. So resistance to persuasion gets stronger when we make a public commitment. Once we publicly commit to a particular attitude or position, we're far less likely to change our view than if we had kept our original opinion to ourselves. It would be embarrassing to admit one is wrong. This is an even stronger effect when the attitude that we're holding is tied to our social identity or the self that the outside world knows. Those ones are even harder to change. So if you are, have identified for a very long time as a vegetarian or something like that, and now it's part of your social identity or what other people know about you, that's even harder to change. Public commitments to certain attitudes can make them resistant to change. And in other words, if you post it on a social platform like Facebook, you're less likely to change your view because you want to keep your consistent self-concept. So this guy, whatever he's shaking on, he's probably going to really stick with the perspective he holds on that as he shakes that hand. The thought polarization hypothesis suggests that the more extended thought we give an issue, the more likely we are to have an extreme entrenched attitude. So if we're just perseverating on a particular topic, then we're likely to get a really strong opinion on this that's hard to change. And you can see how this plays out in politics. The everywhere presence of political talk, especially in the 2020 election, may prompt people to speak more time on political issues and solidify their views. And this little model here is showing how this works. So the more opportunity you have to think, going this dotted arrow to the middle, the more your attitude is likely to become polarized. You believe strongly one extreme or the other. These arrows up to the side are suggesting that there are two mechanisms why this happens. And the first is thought consistency. You're thinking the same thoughts over and over. And the second is thought confidence. You're having a lot of confidence in your thought because of maybe you're knowing more or think you're knowing more. You're probably finding peer support. And again, you're thinking about these things for a long time. So polarized attitudes tend to come when you have more opportunity for thought, and especially if what you're exposed to is bias. So knowledge is a way to become resistant persuasion. The more you know about a topic, the less likely you are to change your attitude. And it might help with confidence as well, because having greater knowledge means we can offer more and better counter arguments. And then this interesting idea of attitude inoculation, using small challenges to strengthen our defense against larger challenges. So to draw the parallel, disease inoculations give a small amount of a virus or a virus particle or stem or segment so that the body launches an attack against bigger viruses like that one. Attitude inoculations work the same way. If you really want to help, let's say your child do well in holding true to resist drug abuse, for example, you might really help him. And let's say he really doesn't want to use drugs. If you attack him, just a little bit of attacks. Yeah, but drugs are, what if your friend comes up? Just these small attacks, then they're going to be able to form some arguments, develop confidence, and have resistance to larger attacks. So how to change someone's attitude? The conviction or certainty with which an attitude is held may change in response to a persuasive message. So unskillful approach to help someone change their mind. We often have these conversations. I hope that you don't, because they're hard, talking to other people, especially on political issues and issues that we don't agree on. And to do it unskillfully and not be likely to have success. You'll try all your reasoning to argue them down. If you give them lousy counter-arguments, you're going to get attitude inoculation. They're going to become even stronger. But even the best arguments aren't persuasive if the source isn't trusted. And mostly, people don't want to change. So even if you make really good arguments, they don't want to change because of that first thing we talked about. They've committed publicly. So it's going to be hard to get them to change. And so what can you do? skillful approach is, first off, to get humble. You don't always know what's best. And be genuinely interested and curious about what that person thinks about that issue. So don't try to persuade them. Rather, be interested in what they know and what they think from a genuine place. Listen genuinely to what they say. Sounds like a weird approach if you don't agree with someone and you think their attitude isn't healthy. But even so, it's good to hear what they say. And as that individual works to explain himself, to articulate his or her position, because you've asked not challenging questions like, oh yeah, why do you think that? Not that, but more like, what is it that brought you to come to that conclusion? I'm curious about what you've learned that brought you to that, like a genuine question. And then that individual tries to explain why they hold it, and then the logic may become apparent to them. And another thing is to ask them after you've listened a long time, respectfully, to ask, so is there anything that would change your mind about that? And even there's a small suggestion, oh no, there's maybe a 1% chance I'd change my mind. Well, even that 1% is something. And as they think about what that thing is, they might come close to changing their mind. And so that is what's recommended. This isn't me making stuff up. I've actually looked into this a lot because I have found it difficult to discuss these kinds of contentious issues myself. So I've wanted to learn what the research is saying. So to end, I want to give you a little bit of a reminder about your project, your final project, for which all the materials are now posted. But you're going to be finding an issue that's important that you'd like to have changed. It'll work best if it's sort of a social justice issue. And what you'll want to do is identify, what issue do you think should be changed? So does it relate to a behavior in your community or an attitude people have in your community? Does it relate to something on campus? Something in your larger family or clan? So think about something that you really believe people need to change on. And then you're going to be identifying what are your beliefs about why it should be changed? What values do you have? What is the source of information about the issue? And this is a quick overview. There's a lot more detail in the little lecture I made. Then you're going to learn, talk to two people whose views are different from yours about this issue, and you're not going to try to change their minds. You're trying to learn, understand their views, their beliefs, their values, and sources about this idea. And then finally, you're going to think about what kind of a campaign would you make to change people. And so you'll want to take into account the beliefs, values, and sources that are meaningful to the people who oppose your idea. And you'll think about the message. Are you going to work with a central or peripheral route? Should you be using like high stimulating, like vividness or fear, or is your audience more cognitively inclined? Should you appeal to norms? Is that what's going to motivate them, or culture? And then think about a source that would be most likely to alter your audience's views. An attractive person, a star, someone with expertise. And so this is the kind of thing you'll be doing for your project. So I encourage you to go onto the link on Blackboard and look at all the information that's there for you so you can get thinking about this.